Well, CinemaCon saw James Gunn show up with a lot of new details for Superman, and the follow-up interviews have been revealing. Let's take a couple minutes to talk about what James Gunn talked about at CinemaCon, what went on in the presentation, and some big reveals that came directly from the studio head's mouth. Well, like I've been saying, this week is CinemaCon, and CinemaCon means lots of new great details on some of our favorite projects. Now, we already got a big presentation from Sony, and yesterday we got one from Warner Brothers, and more importantly, DC Studios. Now, DC Studios brought a lot to the table, but the two highlights of the presentation were definitely first and foremost Superman, along with a few seconds of footage for Dynamic Duo. But we're going to cover the Dynamic Duo in another video. Now at CinemaCon, James Gunn brought a lot of stuff. They played a video that featured a big behind-the-scenes presentation with a cast that seemed like every other James Gunn project. They were clearly having fun, and Rachel Brosnahan even saying, "In James Gunn we trust, I think we can do it." Now, this featurette also included something we haven't seen before, a new shot of Metamorpho. We've only got one close-up look at the character, but apparently they got quite the look at CinemaCon and it was pretty great. They also got some more looks at some other major characters, including Supergirl, including Hawkgirl, who I think is going to play a pretty big part in this film. Now, towards the end of the presentation, Peter Safran jumped in and started calling this July the summer of Superman. So for many people who are kind of worried about the promotion for this project, we are about 90 days out, and that's when all the big stuff will start happening. Now, they did bring some more details from the film, including some new clips and an extended trailer. Now, the clips depicted Krypto saving Superman and taking him to the Fortress of Solitude to be healed by robots. And this is a clip that's likely to be played before Minecraft, so if you want to see this one, it's going to be available. They also played an extended version of the trailer. Now, this was the teaser trailer from back in December, so not a lot new, but apparently there were quite a few extra shots of Lois and Clark in the apartment, so kind of jazzing up the relationship between the two, and of course, Lex Luthor. Now, there was also a lot of promotional art featured, some of which we hadn't seen before, and this one in particular caught my eye. This is the cityscape of Metropolis, and I gotta say, it looks pretty great. I really do love how it looks like the city of tomorrow in the background, but up close, that's the classic Daily Planet. And I totally feel like that's something that really can't change. Now, after the presentation, James Gunn sat down and spoke with Entertainment Weekly, and he had a lot more to say about the project that he didn't reveal in the presentation, where he really didn't get to dive into many details. Now, Entertainment Weekly asked him if this film was based on a specific comic storyline, and Gunn said he would call it an original story, but the tone and the look of the film in many ways was absolutely inspired by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely's All-Star Superman. Gunn went on to say how that particular book really had an old Silver Age feel. More importantly, he said, and I quote, "We have robots and monster babies and giant kaiju and all of that stuff." And that's a lot of what we've seen from the initial trailer. Gunn went on to say that the real meat of this is the incredible relationships in the film, and specifically the relationship between Lois and Clark. He talked about how Lois Lane, who is a pragmatist, she always is a pragmatist in the comics, and Superman is an idealist, and how that works together. And I think that's a pretty important detail because Lois and Clark are far from the perfect couple, and they definitely have different worldly outlooks. This will create some interesting dynamics and maybe even tension between the characters, and I think that'll definitely make the movie a bit more interesting. Now, where it gets interesting though is when he talked about Lex Luthor, and I think that is the big quote. In the interview, he said that the villain wants to defeat and destroy Superman, and quote, "Here's this guy who's this incredible, genius scientist who worked his whole life to become one of the richest, most powerful men in the world, and he does it all to be lauded. I mean, he wants to be the greatest, and suddenly this jerk comes in wearing a cape with a lantern jaw and a cocky grin, and he just takes all the oxygen out of the room, out of the earth, and it creates a burning hatred in this guy." Now, Lex is an evil guy, but he's also a game player, and it sounds like he's sort of your classic selfish businessman taking advantage of the world. And when he starts being lauded by everybody and Superman steals that fame, he basically turns green with envy, which is very classic comic book. Now, how far Lex goes, that's the pretty interesting part. And it's clear Lex is willing to do anything. And honestly, just like in the comics, this sounds like one of the most perfect foils to Superman, especially in that Silver Age context. He talked about monsters and robots and kaiju, and I think they're all coming from Lex. Now, I think the most important thing Gunn said, though, was to close it out, and that's when he talked about Superman himself and what he was trying to achieve in this first film. Now, speaking directly about Superman, he said, quote, "What I try to bring to it is something beautiful that is about goodness of human beings, about kindness in people, because that's what Superman represents to me. He almost represents something old-fashioned, and yet I think that's exactly what we need right now. Kindness, goodness, the innate moral values that we grew up with, that somehow the internet has drowned out and deemed weak." Now, this is my favorite quote to come out of CinemaCon, and James Gunn is spot on here. I really do think the world that we all live in now, and specifically social media and internet access, has turned people into cynics, and even suggested that kindness and goodness are weakness, and they are not. Now, he might just be saying all the right things to get fans excited, but this is what Superman has always been about. His innate moral compass and kindness and goodness has driven the character from day one. There's a big reason Richard Donner put that cat rescuing scene in the first film. It showed how pure Superman is and down to earth, and it sounds like James Gunn absolutely gets that detail. For me, now Superman is probably not only the most important movie for DC Studios, but maybe Warner Brothers Discovery. If this movie doesn't work out, well, the future might definitely be in question. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, Clayface, and Sergeant Rock are already in the process of being made, with Supergirl in front of cameras. So if this reboot fails, it could absolutely derail more plans for the wider DCU. Now, recently some major plot details leaked online. We're not necessarily going to cover those right now, but I will say the CinemaCon presentation kind of confirmed some of the legitimacy of them. So if you want to dive into some of that, and specifically that Jor-El cameo, and specifically the one surrounding Jor-El, well, hop on Google and give that a search, but try not to take the cynics route. Until we know more, what do you guys think? How excited are you for Superman? And do you think James Gunn is approaching this right? Or did you like the more darker, modern version that Zack Snyder brought us more than a decade ago? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Now, before you take off, though, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell for all the updates. We do daily videos, and we want to be your place for all the Marvel and DC news, but we're going to bring it to you truthfully and transparently, so you're really in the know.